G'day, Richard here. You may have heard around the internet that Haltech is celebrating a birthday this year. That's right, we are a huge 35 years old, which makes us one of the oldest companies in the world that does what we do. 35 years is longer than some of you guys watching have been alive, and anyone who's been around for as long or longer will tell you that a lot can happen in that time. And at Haltech, a lot of things did happen, many of which you may not know about. So, here's a list of 10 little known things about Haltech. Haltech was started because of a car magazine. In 1986, Stephen Mitchell was a young electrical engineering student at Sydney University who rode his motorcycle off a cliff. While Steve was recuperating in hospital from his off-cliff excursion, a friend came to him with a quandary. The friend had an imported 2-litre twin-cam engine that he wanted to fit into his Holden Gemini. Now, Weber carburetors were the go back then, but this engine came from the factory with fuel injection, and he wanted to keep it. Unfortunately, when it came, it didn't also come with an ECU, and he wasn't having any luck with the VW unit that he was trying to adapt. Figuring that Steve now had plenty of time on his hands while he was waiting for his bones to knit, he reached out for help. And that started the ball rolling. Soon after, Modern Motor magazine was building a supercharged Ford Falcon, and Steve was called up to do the electronics. And with the backing of his father Bill, they started a company, and the rest, as they say, is history. Haltech ECUs and Dashes are all made in-house. In the early days, Haltech was actually known as EFI Technology.
Now that's a name I've not heard in a long time.
And the first ECUs were literally made in a house. In his early 20s, Steve and 4 employees worked out of a rented house in the Sydney suburb of Marsfield. They had almost no resources. They were hand-etching circuit boards in the kitchen and assembling in the living room. The paint on those early products was baked in the kitchen oven of that rented house. It was in that rented house where this was made. This is the very first and only Haltech F1 prototype. You can see the word HAL on the PCB here. That was inspired by HAL 9000, the computer that ran the ship in the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Dave, this conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.
In Steve's own words, 2001 seemed futuristic in 1986. I mean, the computer talked. It went mad, but it actually talked. It was a joke at the time. The joke turned into the name of the first EFI technology computer, and then later became the name of the company, Haltech. Incidentally, Kubrick's sci-fi masterpiece was also the inspiration for our Valentine's video a couple of years ago. I did the voice of Hal.
Dave, I love you.
But I digress. Ever since then, Haltech products have been designed and made right here in Sydney, Australia. Obviously not in that rented house. We're now in a factory where the hardware, including the PCBs and the casings, are designed by our amazing nerds. The firmware, which is the computer code that makes the machine do what it does, is written right here by a different team of amazing nerds. And the software, which is the program that you use to interface with the unit, is, you guessed it, made right here by... Sorry, the software guys are geeks. But they're still amazing. It's then all assembled under this roof and boxed up before being shipped out to you. Haltech is all around the world. We're not exclusive to Australia though. Ever since 1988, Haltech has had an office in the USA. As you can see on this original manual, we were based in Texas. In those early days, drag racing legends like Keith Black and Kenny Duttweiler taught Steve much about American muscle cars and the engines that powered them. Since then, our presence in the USA has actually grown. We in fact now have 2 offices, one in California and a main distribution and support hub in Kentucky. To tell you more about that, here's a man with an American accent.
Haltech USA was originally established with an office in Texas. That office operated through the 1990s and was later closed. Haltech USA reestablished itself in 2004 with an office in Southern California. That office ran from 2004 until 2007. At that point, we relocated to Lexington, Kentucky. And we were able to really expand our market in the USA. eventually culminating in this facility here in Lexington that we opened in 2016. In addition to the facility here in Lexington, we recently established an operation in California. That operation is headed up by Tim Anderson, formerly of RacePack. And those guys are doing great out there. They're the next branch and evolution of Haltech USA. They're able to provide support and sales and shipping and dispatch from our California operation, which expands our presence across this country.
We're not stopping with the USA though. We also have Haltech locations in the UK, New Zealand, Europe, and even the Philippines. While we're on the topic of being global, have you ever been to Bangkok? If you haven't, you really should. Thailand is a lovely country with wonderfully warm people and some of the most amazing ping pong skills I've ever seen. However, if you have been to Bangkok, you may well have been riding around in a Haltech powered fire-breathing monster without even knowing. You see, many of Thailand's buses were converted from diesel fuel to natural gas using Haltech engine control units. Haltech loves llamas. No, that's not right. I mean larders, specifically the Lada Niva. Why does Haltech love this quirky Russian-built 4x4 that had a reputation for being able to go anywhere? Well, in the early 90s, the top-of-the-range Lada Niva in Australia came OEM equipped with Haltech fuel injection. And that's not the only car that came from the factory with a Haltech ECU. The Mexican-built Mistretta MXT was released in 2012. Built around a tube frame monocoque chassis, it had a mix of carbon fibre and aluminium body elements, which gave it a low curb weight of 930 kilograms. And it went like stink, thanks to the turbocharged Ford Duratec engine, which made about 185 kilowatts and was controlled by, you guessed it, an OEM version of the Haltech Sport 2000. Haltech's own Matt Wright, who you may recognise from some of our product videos, actually spent time in Mexico working with Mistretta on the project. The MXT stopped production in 2014, but not before Top Gear's Richard Hammond could take it for a spin around the mean streets of Mexico. They made a rule because of us. That wasn't the first time Haltech had been on television though. In 1989, EFI Technology and the Haltech computer appeared on the Australian television show Beyond 2000, which featured clips about cutting-edge technology and offered a glimpse into the future, beyond the year 2000. Before this time, Steve had been using a not very portable Amiga computer to tune vehicles. But with the TV appearance coming up, he managed to get Toshiba to sponsor a couple of x86 laptops. Now, laptops back then didn't have a colour screen and they didn't have a hard drive. So you had to boot your OS off a floppy and then change to the Haltech floppy to run the tuning program. There was also no telemetry back then, you know, where the data is sent from the car back to the race engineers in the pits to be analysed, etc. So the whole process had to be done by the seat of the pants. Literally. Race teams would bolt a rough passenger chair into the roll cage and Steve would velcro the laptop to his lap and ride around at full noise with the driver giving hand signals as to when he felt the engine was good or weak. Steve told me the teams would actually sometimes duct tape his helmet to the roll cage to stop it from banging about. Until the Confederation of Australian Motorsports passed a special rule to stop them from doing that. And then telemetry became a bit of a priority. Dude, we almost had you. From the small screen to the big screen. Almost. The Fast and the Furious movie franchise had a huge impact on car culture and the tuning scene. And back when it was more about cars than family, Haltech was nearly there with them. No, there wasn't ever a Haltech system exhaust. In this famous scene from the first movie, Jesse pops the hood on Brian's Eclipse and rattles off a list of frankly bizarre engine mods. Craig Lieberman, the technical advisor for the films, took exception to many of them and tried to have them corrected. Listen to what he says.
I felt that something like this worked better. It's a 4G custom intake manifold, T51 turbo, Haltech ECU, probably making around 400 ponies, assuming beefed up internals.
Of course, with Haltech engine protection, there would have been no danger to the manifold, and Brian's checker plate floor would have most likely stayed intact. Anyway, I think the Aussie version that we made is better.
Pop the hood.
It's a bonnet,
Lift
dickhead.
the bloody bonnet. Oh, Ford Barra Turbo. No shit.
Haltech makes flux capacitors. Not really. Well, we do. Kind of. Back in 2001, a young Back to the Future fan named Nathan Clark wrote to Haltech asking to do work experience. Instead, he got a job screwing ECUs together, packing them boxes and the like. Over time, he was promoted to a sales and technical support role, and then on to the R&D team, working his way up through the ranks to R&D manager, and is now Haltech's Chief Operations Officer, which means he's my boss. But remember, he's a Back to the Future fan. A big one. Over that time, he actually bought a DeLorean, turned it into a LS-powered movie car replica, and did more. His Back to the Future obsession led him to leaving a few Easter eggs into some of our ECUs. In fact, on our EP3 and DC5 Platinum Pro plugins, if you take the case off, you can see a spot on the PCB where LEDs can be installed to make a working, flashing flux capacitor. I told you the people who work here are amazing nerds. Haltech is an OG street outlaw. Street outlaws brought no time, no prep drag racing to the world. And Haltech has been on board since way back in season 6, when Joe Dominator Woods became the first of the original 405 crew to run a Haltech. Since then, we've provided the electronic brains of Doc's Street Beast and Stunt Double, Derek's Silver Unit Camaro, Asian's Dung Beetle, and Kamikaze's El Camino. We even helped build a burnout car for Farm Truck when he and Asian came over to Australia for Summer Nats. Haltech is built tough and built to last. Let me get a couple of examples. So, what do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about being built tough. This charred Elite 550 has the dubious title of being Haltech's most abused yet still working product. Having survived a crash and an engine fire that destroyed most of the car, this little box was pulled out of the wreckage, tested, and proven to be still fully operational. And as for built to last, well, I could talk about the Haltech ECUs from the 1990s that are still out there powering cars today, like the TA22 Celica that Scott tuned in this video here. But what about an ECU from the 1990s that Haltech still makes today? I'm talking about the Sport GM. Yep, this ECU started its life as an E6 back in the mid-1990s and has been continuously manufactured and sold ever since then. As they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and that's pretty much been the case with the Sport GM, which you can still buy brand new right now. Haltech is still a family-run business. I like to think that Dom Toretto would be a Haltech guy, because Haltech really is all about family. While we're now a large global company, one thing that remains the same is the fact that Haltech is a family-owned business. Mark Bevan took ownership of Haltech in 2003, and he's been at the helm since then. Far from being a corporate fat cat, Mark is actually a car guy just like us. He's an engine builder by trade and a true motorsport enthusiast, whose passion has inspired rev heads around the world, whether they're Haltech employees or not, and whether they know it or not. He's also a pretty good bloke. So there you have it, 10 things that you may not have known about Haltech. Tell me in the comments which one surprised you the most. Or better still, if you think you know something about Haltech that I don't, let me know, and if you surprise me, I'll send you one of these sweet 35th anniversary jackets. Until next time, my name's Richard. Copulator.